Good evening, everyone. So, today we'll be starting with our webinar HTML Canvas to CSS Magic, where we'll be learning about HTML basics, CSS basics, and also a little bit about JavaScript. I am Agrama Tripathi, a technical head at Creation Labs. So moving on to the so first we'll talk about that when you're deciding to develop an application using any programming language, one of the first problems you face is that the programming language do not include a library to create a user interface. You need to use some frameworks to access the OS layer. Every programming language has at least one, but you need to choose it first. One of the nice things about developing for the web is that the web provides a very rich and simple framework to create applications that provide a lot of features, not only interface but also access to peripherals, audio, input, gamepad, etc. And this API is very easy to use. Moving on, we'll talk about how HTML, CSS, and JavaScript works. So, web is kind of this front end that you will have where users can use your application. Will have a platform to use your application. So, in web technologies, we have three technologies that we'll be talking about. Firstly is HTML, which is used to create the document structure and content. Second is CSS, which is used to control the visual aspects. And third is JavaScript for interactivity. So consider HTML as like your bone structure. JavaScript is the brain where it is allowing to have some kind of interactivity in your website, and CSS is used to control visual aspects like how will the website look and basically give it features. Now we move on that what happens inside a browser. So inside a browser, so a browser acts as a renderer that takes documents, constructs a visual representation of them. Starting with the most simple one, a text document, it will try to visualize it. You can try to drop any .txt file in your browsers to visualize it. The problem is that a text document without any formatting tend to be hard to read for the user. That's why HTML was created to give text some format. Firstly, now we'll be talking about HTML. So let's move on and see what is HTML. So HTML comes from the word hypertext markup language, which defines the structure of a language. So HTML allows us to define a structure of a document or a website. Now, HTML is not a programming language. It is a markup language, which means its purpose is to give structure to the content of the website and not to define an algorithm. It is a series of nested tags that is a subset of XML that contains all the website information, be it text, images, and videos. Here is an example of tags. As you can see, between title tag, we have our heading where this will go as the title of the website. So HTML defines the page structure. A website can have several HTML documents to different pages. So each page would have one HTML document with it. Or on the right hand side, you can also see another example. So this is how an HTML document looks like, and this page will only print high in the middle of the page. Moving on, we'll be learning about the we'll be learning about some basic rules in HTML. Firstly we have sorry yeah so the basic rules in HTML is, like I said earlier, it uses the XML syntax that are tags with attributes which can contain other tags too. So for example, the syntax of an XML can be tag name attribute which is equals to value, then we'll close the tag and we can have some content, and then again we'll need to close the tag. It stores all information that must be shown to the user. There are different HTML elements for different types of information and behavior. The information is stored in a tree-like structure, that is nodes that contain nodes inside, and it is called DOM, which is document object model. It gives document some semantic structure. That is, it is title, section, form. So we can have like a header or we can have a footer and we can have the body of the website, which is helpful for computers to understand website content. Now, this is an example of HTML syntax where you can see that we have a div tag. The tag has an attribute called main. Then in the next line, you can see this is how comments are given in HTML. And then we have a text tag. So all the text that is written, it is written without a tag. Then next we have a button. So some tags are self-closing, like image tag and ruler tag. Other tags are not self-closing. You have to close them. Moving on to some name tags in HTML, we have the div tag, which is a container tag, usually represents a rectangular area with information inside. Image tag, which is a self-closing tag. So if you want to put in an image in, you can use the image tag. For attributes, you will need to give the source. And in the attributes, you can also give out length, height, and where do you want to align it. Next, we have the anchor tab, which is a clickable link to another URL. Next, there is a paragraph tag, which where you can write a paragraph and set color or give it size or font. Next is the H1, which is a title tag, H1 being the biggest size you can have. So these header title tag goes from H1 to H5 and it reduces as the number increases in size. Next, we have the input tag, which is a widget to let a user introduce information. So this input tag is helpful in formation of forms or any other kind of place where we need the user to input information. Style tag is used to insert CSS rules, which we'll be learning about later. Next, we have the script tag, which is used to execute JavaScript, and span tag, which is a null tag. Moving on, we have some more tags, which is UL. So that stands for unordered list. So it is a bulleted list of items. Next, we have the table tag, which represents tables for organizing tabular data. Form tag, like I said, we can use along with input tag to get in some collecting some collecting some user input from HTML forms. Uh, Rest of the tags, I think we have covered. Moving on, how information is wrapped inside an HTML. So it's very important to divide your page into sections. Dividing your page into sections helps you to understand where each thing should be placed. So you can either use tags like div and span. So div divides an area into rectangular boxes, and you can also put a div inside another div. So it will be helpful for you to sectionize your area. So we use HTML tags to wrap different information differently. The more structure has the information, the easier it will be to access and present it. We can change the way information is represented on the script screen depending on the tags where it is contained. So we wouldn't be worried about using too many tags. Now let's look at some of HTML's good practices that we should follow. So it is very important to have all information properly wrapped in tags, and it should have some sort of semantics. So sometimes people avoid using tags if they want to write some information on the website screen. It is advised that all of your information is stored between an opening tab and a closing tab. We can also extend the code semantics by adding extra attribute to the tags. So ID tells us the unique identifier for this tag. So we can give name to a tag, and class tell us the generic identifier for this tag. So if we look below, we'll see that we have div ID equals to profile pic and class equals to mini image. So this div is for a profile pic and class defines its feature, which is a mini image. So that's how you use ID and class. People usually get confused between both of these a lot. So I hope this example helps you clear the confusion. Next, we'll see that, okay, so like I said, it is you are advised to have information properly wrapped in the tags and have some semantics. So on the left side, we have the information wrapped only between a div tag, and this will not give a proper output. This will not give proper structure to your website. Instead, it is advised to do one on the right side where you are having separate tags for each line, so you can customize those lines according to your preferences or whatever suits your website. Moving on, we'll be starting with CSS, which is cascading style sheets. So we know that CSS is responsible for designing the website, as I said in the initial introduction. So, CSS allows us to specify how to present, render the document information that is stored in HTML. Thanks to CSS, we can control all aspects of visualization and some other features. So we can control colors for content, backgrounds, borders. We can control the margins. We have interior margin, exterior margin, what we call as padding and margin. People get confused between those two. And we can also choose the position where to put it, its alignment. We can have a definite size, the width, the height, and also the behavior. So we can use CSS animation to decide what kind of behavior we want with what kind of buttons. So let us see at a look at a CSS example. So as you can see here, this tag will change all the tags in my website to look blue with font Tahoma with 14 px and leaving a margin of 10 px around. So here the asterisk means that all or this change should be made to all tags, and it is not defined to a specific tag, and all tags, all my font would now have a blue color. Its font style would be Tahoma and the size would be 14 px. So instead of writing everywhere what I want through CSS, I chose all the tags on one go and was able to make the same changes. So now let's talk about some CSS fields, like what can you manipulate using CSS. So firstly, you can manipulate the color. So there are three ways you can do that. First, we have a hex code, that is using a pound sign. You can write the hex code of a color. There are some colors already available that you can just type the name of, like red, or you can use the RBGA values to decide what color do you want. A stands here for opacity. Next, we have background images. So you can set a background image using a URL. You can give whatever, if it's, you can give an URL of an online website, or you can give an image stored on your device. Then font size, as discussed earlier, you can change the font, you can change the border, margin, padding, width and height. As you can see, you can choose width from multiple options. You have multiple units you can use, percentage, pixels to em. um, it is Next we have text alignment. So where do we want the text in a particular section, particular div? Then cursor, display, and overflow are some other fields. Next, let's talk about CSS integration. So, how do you put CSS inside HTML? We all know how to access an HTML website, but how do we integrate CSS inside HTML? So, there are three rules that you can do to add your CSS inside your website. So, first is by a style tag. So instead of writing code in a separate document, if your CSS code is really small, you can do one thing. You can use the style tag as discussed earlier and put the CSS code on the same page as the HTML code. Next, you can reference to an external file. So sometimes you have huge amount of CSS code. So you want to store it in some other sheet. So you can do one thing. You can use the link tag where you will specify the place, the name of the file you want to access, and rel you will mention as style sheet. Another, you can itself use it in the tag. So we can do it individually also. So for paragraph, particular this paragraph, I want color blue and margin 10 px. Now an important question is that if I have this case style, inside the style tag I have paragraph color blue, and later somewhere I am describing a p tag with style equals to color red. Which color would the text be? So now the text would be in red color because CSS HTML will latest read that and apply those changes only. Moving on. Now let's talk about CSS selectors. So let's start by changing the background color of one tag of our website. So we have div and we have background color as red. This CSS rule means that every tag div found in our website should have red color. Remember that divs are used mostly to represent areas of our website. We could also change the whole website by affecting the tag body. So we can simply choose the body tag to change background color to red. So it is very important to choose which tag we want uh, to affect which area. So suppose now the question arises, if I want alternative tags or alternative div tags to have different background color. So there is a concept called nth child in CSS where you can choose which child do you want to have what color. So there you need to be very specific about CSS selectors, and sometimes uh, you can also use the help of classes basically, which we'll be talking about in the next slide. So like I said, what if we want to change one specific tag and not all tags of the same size? We can specify more precise selector besides the name of a tag. For instance, by class or ID. To specify a tag with a given class name, we use dot. As you can see here, we don't want all paragraph tags to be affected. We only want a specific paragraph tag to be effective, which has a class of intro. So we will put simply p.intro and change the color to red. Next, let's talk about some more CSS selectors. So, as discussed earlier, just for the tag name, if we want to change all the P tags, we simply use P, open the curly brackets, write all the changes we want, close the curly brackets. Dot affects the tags with that specific class name. So, P dot class name, open the curly brackets and close the curly brackets. It will affect all the P tags with that specific class name. Then the pound character or the sharp character specifies the tags with ID. So we talked about classes and now we are talking about ID. So p hash intro would specify only those p tags which have the ID of intro. Now, if we have semicolon or two dots, sorry, colon or two dots, then it defines the behavior. Like once the mouse moves on top of that area, what will happen? So p dot hover, I can ask it to change color, I can ask it to change size, I can ask it to change font. So once the mouse is top on it, it can change its behavior. So affects all, this will now, in the example given here, it will affect all the p tags. Next, we have bracket and some sort of attribute value. So tags with the attribute value equal to the value I type in, only those would be affected. So in the example here, we have input type equals to text. So it only affects all the input tags that have type text. So next, let us talk about like how you can also specify tags by its context. For example, tags are inside a tag of a matching selector. We can just separate the selector by a space. So we can have div sharp main p dot intro. This means that all the p tags having the class intro that are inside the div tag of id main. An example below here shows which tag would be affected and which tag wouldn't be affected. So the first p tag is affected only because it is inside the div tag which has the id main, while the next div tag, although satisfying the conditions of having class as intro, is not satisfied because it is not inside the div tag. And you can combine selectors to narrow it down more. So it can be div hash main dot intro colon hover. This will apply CSS to any tag div with the ID main and class intro if a mouse goes over it. And you do not need to specify a tag also sometimes. If you want to affect a particular class or an id without a tag, you can simply use it of any nodes of id main. So a hash main would work. This works when you have different tags under a class or a id, because sometimes you might have a p tag under a specific class and also an h1 tag, and you want both of them to change. So this is how we use it. If you want to select only elements that are direct child of one element, that is, they do not have an ancestor with that rule, we use the greater than character. So ul dot menu greater than li. Finally, if you want to use the same CSS action to several selectors, you can use comma. So div comma p, it will apply to all the div tags and all the paragraph tags in the code. Uh, So now moving on from selectors, one of the hardest parts of CSS is constructing the layout of your website. The structure inside the video is what I mean by. So by default, HTML tends to put everything in one column, which is not ideal. There have been many proposals in CSS to address this issue, which is by having tables or fixed divs or flex or grids. It is important to know that by default, any width and height specified to an element will not take into account its margin. So a div with width 100 px and margin 10 px will measure 120 px on the screen and not 100 px. This could be a problem breaking your layout. You can change this behavior by the box model of the element. So the width you use is the outermost so the width you use is the outermost border. So now let us talk about a little more about the box model in CSS. So the CSS box model is a fundamental concept in web development that describes how elements on a web page are structured and how their dimensions can be calculated. It consists of several layers of components that define the total space an element occupies within the layout. These layers include content, where the actual content of the HTML element, such as text, images, or other media, goes. Padding, the space between the content and element's border. It creates an inner spacing within the element, and padding can be set using properties like padding top, padding right, padding bottom, and padding left. Border, the border is the line that surrounds the content and the padding. It can be customized to the terms of thickness, style, color using properties like border width, border style, and border color. Margin is the space between the border of the element and adjacent element in the layout. It creates an outer spacing. Margins can be set using properties of margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left. Uh, the total width height of an element are calculated by adding the content width height, padding, border, and margin. However, keep in mind that these calculations might affect CSS properties like box sizing, which can change how dimensions are interpreted. For example, the box sizing property can have two values: content box, which is the default value. The width and the height of an element are calculated including only the content, and the padding and border are added outside these dimensions. And border box, the width and height of an element include content, padding, and border within those dimensions. The margin is still added outside. Understanding the box model is crucial when designing and laying out web pages using CSS, as it helps control spacing, sizing, and alignment of these elements within layout. You will be able to see this box kind of model once you click on inspect element of any website, and it gives you an idea how well established website use this kind of spacing. So next, let's move on to the grid system, because most sites are structured in grid system. So I recommend to use the grid system initially to create the site structure exactly. So a CSS grid system is a layout technique that allows you to create a complex grid-based layouts for web pages. It provides a way to divide the web page content into rows and columns, making it easier to create responsive designs and that adapt to different screen sizes and devices. CSS Grid is a native layout in CSS that provides powerful and flexible way to create grids. So like we can see in the example given in on the right side, we have a grid container. So we'll put display equals to grid to specify that we are using a grid system. And the template, we'll be giving the row size and the column size and the gap between each row and column, and grip item one. So we can choose how each grid is going to look inside a grid system. So like in this example, we can see that for item one is given rows, column 1 to 5 and rows 1 to 3, and the color blue, which is visible in the screen on the left side. So remember, while CSS Grid is a powerful tool for creating layouts, it might not be supported in the older browsers. Always consider browser compatibility when using advanced features like CSS features like Grid, and provide fallbacks or alternatives as needed. So next we have full screen divs. Creating full screen divs in website design often involves setting up elements that take up entire viewport height and width. This can be useful for creating full page sections, models, overlays, or other visual effects. You can achieve this using CSS and potentially JavaScript, which we'll be talking about a bit later, for more advanced interactions. So a lot of cool effects like parallax and other things can be used using CSS also, plainly CSS, but JavaScript makes it easier and more refined. So remember to always adjust, like the example I've shown right now into the screen, to according to your design and functionality needs. Additionally, again, I would like to put this up. Consider accessibility and cross-browser browser compatibility when implementing full screen divs or modals in your web projects. Moving on, we'll move to the next topic, which is JavaScript. So, as you can see that I've told earlier, JavaScript allows to give some sort of interactivity to the elements of the website. The syntax is similar to C or Java, but it doesn't have any types, and you can change the content of HTML or the CSS applied to an element using JavaScript. And you can even send and retrieve information from internet to update the content of the web without reloading the page. So now JavaScript is a very high level, dynamic, versatile programming language that is primarily used for developing interactive and dynamic content on websites. It is often referred as the language of the web because it is a fundamental technology for creating client-side interaction in web browsers. JavaScript allows developers to build dynamic web applications, add interactivity to their websites, manipulate DOM, and communicate with the servers to send data. If we talk about some key features of JavaScript, few of them include client-side scripting. So JavaScript is primarily used on the client side, meaning it runs in the user's web browser. This allows developer to create dynamic and responsive user interfaces without relying solely on the server-side interactions. Secondly, it provides interactivity, as I have said multiple times. JavaScript enables developers to create interactive elements such as form buttons, animations, and dynamic content that respond to user action in real time. DOM manipulation, the document object model, DOM represents the structure of an HTML document as a tree. JavaScript can be used to manipulate the DOM, allowing developers to dynamically modify content and appearance of the website. Event handling. JavaScript enables handling of various events like clicks, mouse movements, keyboard inputs, and many more. Other key features would include asynchronous programming, which is programming using mechanisms like callback, promises, and async and await. Cross-browser compatibility, server-side usage, and libraries and frameworks. So it has a rich system of ecosystem of libraries and frameworks such as jQuery, React, Angular, Vue.js, which provides pre-built tools and components to simplify and speed up development. I would like to say this that JavaScript should not be confused with Java. Despite the similar names, they are different programming languages with distinct features and use cases. So, JavaScript is a powerful scripting language that empowers web developers to create dynamic, interactive, and engaging user experience on web. It is an essential skill for front-end developers and plays a crucial role in modern web development. Moving on, let's look at how we can integrate JavaScript into our website. So, like CSS, we have three ways to execute JavaScript code in a website. First, we can embed it in the HTML using the script tag. So within the same HTML document, we can use the script tag, write some code, whatever we want JavaScript to do, whatever interactivity we want our website to have. And in the same document, we can execute it. Second is to import a JavaScript file using the script tag. So script source where you want this JavaScript file from. Second is to inject code on event inside a tag. So if you want a button to do specifically something, so you can write there only what you want it to do. So in the example given below, we have button on click JavaScript, which would give us some code, and then you can check if the button is working or not. Next, moving on, we have JavaScript syntax. So, like I said earlier, JavaScript syntax is sorry, yeah. So, JavaScript syntax is very similar to C++ or Java, but it is much simpler. The first example, we can see how a variable is declared. So, var my number equals to 10. So we don't need to define what type of variable we are having beforehand. Comments are made by two slashes. Uh, then we can store string, arrays, any kind of, we can make an object where we can store dictionary kind of data structures. We have for loops in it as shown in the example. So JavaScript, this refers to the rules and conventions that dictate how you write a code in the programming language. So proper syntax ensures that your code is correctly understood and executed by JavaScript interpreters. Here are some key aspects of the JavaScript syntax. Statements and expressions. JavaScript code is composed of statements and expressions. Statements perform actions or control flows, while expression produces value. So x equal to 5 would be a statement, but x plus 3 would be an expression. Variables. Like I said, declaring variables, you can use var or let or constant keyword. Var has a functional level scope, and constant have a block level scope. Constant has a read only and cannot be reassigned scope. Then we have data types. Like I said, there are very several types of data types, including numbers, string, booleans, arrays, objects, and more. Use appropriate data types for your variables and value. Operators, we have all kind of operators. Function, you can declare the function using keyword function, and using arrows you can declare what kind of output specifically this block will have. It has the conditional statements, if, else if, and else statements to create logic, loops, for, while, and do while loops for iterating through the code blocks multiple times. And that's, I think, all about JavaScript syntax. Now let's move on to a JavaScript example. So as you can see, yeah. So as you can see, the JavaScript and HTML code I've provided here demonstrate the basic structure of an HTML document with simple JavaScript snippet that changes the text content of an H1 element. So firstly, we'll see that in the HTML side of it, although we have put in the body tag, we have an H1 title, which is titled "This is a title." Then we start on a script. The script box contains your JavaScript code. First, we are selecting the H1 element by using document.query selector. Next, we are changing the content of the H1 element. So we change it to this is another title. So H JavaScript code once it's executed, it will change from this is a title to this is another title. Keep in mind this example demonstrates the basic use case of JavaScript for DOM manipulation. In more complex scenario, you might use event listeners, separate and external JavaScript files, and follow the best practices for code organization and maintainability. Next, let's talk about JavaScript APIs. So, a JavaScript API refers to the collection of functions and methods and objects that allow you to interact with and manipulate various aspects of a system, application, or services using JavaScript codes. API provide a way for different software components to communicate and exchange data. So, like I said, the term JavaScript API refers to a set of function methods, objects, and properties that are provided by the programming interface. Now, API stands for Application Programming Interface that allows developers to interact with and manipulate various aspects of JavaScript environment. These API enable developers to perform tasks ranging from manipulating DOM to making network requests and accessing browser features. Here are some commonly used JavaScript APIs. Oh, I think I did not change the slide. Sorry, yeah. So here are some commonly used JavaScript APIs. So first one is DOM API, which is the document object model. DOM API allows you to interact with the structure and content of HTML and XML documents. Sorry. Uh, yeah. So we can use methods like get element by ID, query selector, append child, add event listeners, which are a part of DOM API. AJAX or asynchronous JavaScript and XML API. AJAX API enables you to make asynchronous network requests to fetch data from servers without reloading the entire page. Web Storage API provides a way to store data locally in user web browsers. These include two storage mechanisms, local storage and session storage. Geolocation API. The geolocation API allows you to retrieve geographic position of a device users. Canvas API. Canvas API provides a way to draw graphics and create visual elements directly within the web page. Audio and video APIs allows you to put in audio and video inside your web pages. And there are several other APIs like IndexedDB, Service Worker APIs, Web Worker API, which you can use according to your needs. Now, how we have talked about how JavaScript retrieves element. Uh, So you can retrieve elements from DOM, the HTML tree, using different approaches. Let us talk about those approaches. So first is the crawling the HTML tree approach, which is starting from the body and traversing its children using a selector like in CSS, attaching event listeners. Sorry, attaching event listeners, which is calling functions when some actions are performed. So in Java, common methods would be get element by ID, query selector for all, like I have already talked about. We will talk each of these three types in a little bit detail. So JavaScript for crawling, yeah, JavaScript crawling the DOM. So crawling the DOM object model using JavaScript involves navigating through the structure of an HTML document to access and manipulate elements and attributes and content. This is useful for tasks like extracting data, modifying the web pages dynamically, or performing actions on specific elements. So you can access the elements by get element by ID, query selector, query selector all, get element by class name, and get element by tag name. Next, you have to traverse the doc. You can navigate through parent, child, and sibling elements using properties like parent node, child, first child, last child, previous sibling, next sibling. Access and modifying the content. Use the text content inner HTML value properties to access and modifying the content. Next, we have JavaScript using selectors. So you can also retrieve the item using selectors. Yeah, so using selectors in JavaScript allows you to target specific elements within the document object model using CSS style queries. Selectors provide a convenient way to access elements without having to traverse the DOM manually. Here's how selectors work with DOM. So in the query selector method, it returns the first element that matches with the CSS query. Query selector all will return a node list containing all the elements that match the query. You can have multiple selectors and you can combine different selectors. There are pseudo class selectors and pseudo element selectors too. So while working with a multiple element, remember that selector methods return references to the DOM element or the node list, allowing you to manipulate them, change their content, attribute, style, and more. Always ensure that you are using the right selector to target the element that you need in the specific use case. Now, we know how can we select the nodes of a JavaScript, but we are not aware about how we can create the nodes. So we'll check that in this section. So in JavaScript, you can create nodes and elements and text nodes using DOM API, the API we have talked about earlier. This is useful for dynamically generating content and adding it to your web pages. Here's how you can create nodes. So first you can create an element by giving a variable some name, and then you can use the syntax doc.create element to create an element. Suppose here we are creating a div element. Then you can attach them to the DOM. So you can use DOM.query selector. We are attaching it to the class name using hash name, and we are appending the child element. So we have appended one div. Next, we can remove it from parent. So to remove it from your parent, we'll again choose to select the element, and then we'll use the code element.parent node.remove child, and we'll remove the element. You can also clone an element easily, which is just using a variable and using the syntax clone node. Other than that, you can replace a child, insert it before, and create other document fragments. Next, we have how we can modify the node. So from JS, you can change the node attributes, and you can set it to my node dot. Suppose we set an ID for a particular node. You can set a class for a particular node, and you can add it to current classes. To change the content, you can change the content by simply writing what you want the content to be, and you can also change the CSS, which is my node.style.color. So for color, you can use dot color. For size, you can use dot style, dot size. So by using style, you can change any CSS property. Or if you want to add any kind of behavior, so you can use add event listener to do something on that particular node, on a particular function. Now, last topic that we have for last topic we have for day in JavaScript would be using input. If you want the user to be able to input some text, we use the tags input, like we are already aware. From JavaScript, we can attach events like click or key down to modify the content of the input. So some events would clear out, like here we can see clear out the event. Uh, in JavaScript, working with input element is common for handling user interaction, collecting user data, and performing various action based on that input. You can interact with the input elements like text input, checkbox, radio buttons, and more. Here's how you can work with input elements in JavaScript. You can first, you'll need to access the element. Once you access the element, you can set some sort of input value, and on some kind of event, that input value can be changed to something else. Like here, the input value is changing to a blank site. So this will clear any kind of text that is inside the input. Remember that input elements can have different types, attributes, each affecting their behavior, property. Additionally, when working with forms and input validation, consider HTML5 form attributes and JavaScript's check validity methods to ensure data quality and user experience. So I think this was all about JavaScript. As you can see, JavaScript is a very versatile and powerful programming language that plays a pivotal role in web development. It is primarily used for adding interactivity and dynamic behavior. Also, it enhances experiences to websites and web applications. If we go in conclusion, JavaScript is an essential tool for modern web development, allowing developers to create dynamic, engaging, and interactive websites and applications. Its versatility and ubiquity makes it a must-learn language for anyone who's interested in web development. Lastly, I would end this webinar with an example of a website. So here you can see that in HTML, in index.html, we have written the code down for HTML part of it, where we are using a link tag to refer to style.css. Style.css is our CSS sheet where we have specified what attributes do we want what in our particular tag. So the first tag we have of a welcome in H1, and next in the paragraph we have a button called click me. Then we are moving on to the script, which is source to code.js, where we have stored our JavaScript. So in CSS, we can see that in H1 we have given the color #333, and for the button we have specified border color and background color. And in the JavaScript code, you can see that we are fetching the button from DOM, that is the button. Uh, then we are attaching an event to when the listener clicks on it. And then we create a function that will be called when the button is pressed. So what will happen? Alert is used to pop up a window. So once the button is clicked, a pop-up window would open saying the button is clicked. So this is an example of a very basic website. I hope this gives you a better understanding of how HTML, CSS, and JavaScript can be integrated to make a website that is functional, structural, and a good as well as it is appealing to the users. So creating this presentation has given me an opportunity to explore the fundamental basic blocks of modern web development. So we have in this webinar, we have dealt in the core concepts of web development, that is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. These three technologies form the foundation of virtually every websites and web application you encounter on the internet today. So HTML serves as a structural backbone of the web content. It provides framework for organizing and presenting information on a web page. And CSS elevates the website design by enabling us to control presentation and styling of HTML elements. Through CSS, we can modify color, font, spacing, layout, and responsive design. JavaScript introduces interactivity and dynamic behavior in web application. By deploying this versatile programming language, we can respond to user action, manipulate the DOM, create animation, validate forms, and even fetch and display data from remote servers. Collectively, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript empower us to craft immense digital experiences, whether it's simple static websites to complex interactive applications. These technologies provide the means to engage user, convey information, and enhance usability. As you embark your journey into web development, remember remember that mastering HTML, CSS, and JavaScript requires continuous learning and practice. The landscape of web is ever evolving with new tools and frameworks and standards emerging regularly. Embrace this dynamic nature and never stop exploring the vast possibilities that these technologies offer. So, whether you're building a personal blog, an e commerce platform, a social media app, or any other web project, the trio of HTML, CSS, and JS will be your steadfast companions, guiding you through the realms of web development and enabling you to shape the digital world. So, this brings us to the end of this webinar. I hope you were able to learn something. Uh, Thank you so much for joining in.